today to talk about finding co-founders. So it's something we've all faced at some point in our journey. It's something that's really, really exciting, but also it's difficult. You need to make sure your values aligned. You need to find the people with the right skill sets. And we're going to talk today about some practical stuff that you can do to make that process a little bit easier. And I've got a couple of people with me today that have both launched their own businesses and obviously found co-founders to do that, but also actively support founders today. So it'd be great, Anne, if you could start and let us know who you are and how you support founders.
Shall I begin? Okay.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. Hey, I'm Em. I'm the co-founder of a company called Hotbed. We're a virtual accelerator for founders around the world. We started around 15 months ago, and right now we've worked with just under 500 startups, focused heavily on pre-seed and seed stage founders. Looking forward to diving into that.
Lovely. And Greg?
I'm Greg. I'm one of the co-founders at Agora Talent. We're a recruitment business focused mainly on the consumer industries. My own remit is leading our startup team. So we go in and help founders scale their businesses by attracting talent across different disciplines. We usually work with seed, Series A, Series B businesses. Sometimes we implant into the company as well. And we also have a part of our business that recruits into VCs as well. So quite embedded in the startup community.
Absolutely. And I think, we've obviously been working together a few years. Did we originally meet at one of the pitch events, maybe 2019? Is that right?
Yeah, the world before COVID, I think it was. I think it was. Yeah, it was. It's been good to see kind of, I suppose, things come back kind of post-pandemic. And it seems to be there's a lot more kind of energy and excitement around events, networking. And I think at the early stage side of things, it's as busy as ever. So exciting times.
Excellent. Anne, let's go back to, your business is fairly fresh to start. I think you said 15 months ago. I know I think you have one co-founder, is that right? Could you just tell us a little bit about how that relationship started?
So it's actually quite funny. She hired me in a job while I was in uni, and so she was my manager for about 2 years, and we were working at a company called Tech Hub, which was a community and co-working space for founders and startups in London. We were running the program team there, and so we were putting on around 200 events per year for founders. And so when the company shut down because of COVID, we both loved working together, and we loved what we were doing. We were passionate about the same thing, and we were filled with ideas on how we could support founders in the COVID environment and afterwards. So we started our company, I think, the day after our other company that we were working at shut down. And so now we've been working together for 5-ish years. But I think what's great about how we started was we had been in the deep end together. We had been in stressful situations. We had been trying to manage very ambiguous and opaque tasks. We had dealt with a lot of founders and high pressure stuff. And also we realized how much fun we had together. And even when things were really challenging, we could always still laugh and support each other. And so that was a pretty good foundation for founding a co-founder. Obviously at the time, that was not on my mind whatsoever because she was my boss, but it turned out that it set things up really well for us.
Yeah, I love that because it's road tested, and you made that point there that, it's fun. And that's such a critical part of it when you're spending so much time together. What about you, Greg? What was your experience like?
Yeah, it was relatively similar actually. So I've got two co-founders, Felix and Caroline. Felix was someone I'd worked for about 5 years. We worked pretty closely together. So I think, as Em was saying, it comes the trust aspect is huge. I think when starting a business, you're going to be spending so much time together. And I think, if you've had that opportunity to work with someone for a long period of time, I think it really does help. We'd had kind of similar frustrations working for quite a large kind of corporate business where a lot of the challenges we were having we didn't think were focused enough on the customer and what we were looking to achieve. And I think we almost kind of convinced each other that the timing was right to go and start Agora and take it forward from there. We then had Caroline join as a third co-founder, and that was slightly different. She was one of my biggest competitors, so I spent 7 years competing pretty closely with her, often losing, and really seeing how strong she was. So we'd got to know each other quite well, and I think there was a mutual respect for what we could deliver on. And we'd always kind of spoken about the opportunity to potentially kind of start up, and she'd actually worked for Felix. Her first ever job 14 years ago, I think, was Felix hired her as a graduate. So it was a weird kind of myriad where we kind of all knew each other, and when we had the opportunity for her to come on board, it was it was a complete no-brainer. So that's how we started. So yeah, it was pretty kind of tried and tested, and has worked quite well, albeit kind of different characters.
Yeah, and that's got to be the most common way, right? Like you look in your existing network. I had a very similar experience to him there, where I started with my previous boss as well. But we'll go into kind of a bit more detail and advice on if you can't find anyone on that network in a minute. But I just wanted to get a tiny bit more context on what you do now. So, Greg, first of all, it'd be great to hear about your initiative around helping people find co-founders and how that's going, kind of what's involved.
Yeah, I think we launched an initiative this year as kind of the market has shifted a little bit, and it did kind of over the last 12 months. We started networking a lot more and started to speak to people, and there seemed to be a lot of people that had been made redundant or were kind of looking at new challenges, or their startups and had kind of failed, and they were back out onto the market thinking about what's next. And at these events, I met a couple of people that had really good business ideas and wanted to find co-founders for them, but didn't necessarily have anyone that was in their sort of immediate network. They'd kind of looked at a lot of different programs as well that they thought was a little bit daunting, that they would be kind of matched up pretty quickly with a co-founder, and wanted to kind of spend a bit more time. So we felt that there could be a way to help the startup community a little bit more. And what we've done is actually launched a scheme where we take on 6 projects a year and work with people to help introduce them to co-founders, but actually sit down with them and actually work out what they need. Like it's been a really interesting journey with our first project to actually decipher what that kind of co-founding team needs to look like. And there's a lot that goes into it. I think you've got to kind of look forward and look at yourself and your own kind of skill set. And I think we've learned quite a lot on that journey. And then we help them set them up with different advisors, and it's been a really interesting kind of journey that we've been on. The project that we're working on, they're looking like it will be kind of fundraising in September, which is really exciting. And they've got a whole heap of people that have been helping out. I think one thing the startup community, especially that we've seen in London, is really good for is the amount people are willing to actually help each other, and I think it's outstanding. And just from being on that journey, we've seen that. So we're nearly there with the first project, and we've just launched a second one as well in InsurTech, which we're excited about as well. So it's been an interesting journey with them.
Yeah, and just to say, because I don't think you mentioned it there, Greg, that is a pro bono scheme that you're running, and just out there sort of helping.
Yeah, it is. Because I think obviously when they're this early, cash is at a complete premium, and also you've got people that will be joining the business without earning a salary or making those kind of big leaps a lot of the time. Yeah. So it's completely pro bono.
And just final point on that process that you've gone through with the first kind of intake, like what came out of that meeting, or is there anything you can kind of draw from that meeting where you're like, this is a useful way to scope out exactly what you'll need?
Yeah, I think there is. I think you've got to really kind of look at yourself, and actually you've got an advantage, I think, when you're looking at a co-founder that you don't know, because I think what we found, or what I've found with my co-founders, is that it's very tried and trusted who we are and how we work together. But we also have a very similar train of thought. We've all come from large corporate businesses doing a very similar thing. So actually getting that kind of diversity in thinking has been a real challenge for us as we've been growing our business. And I think actually when you've got the opportunity to go out and really find who that perfect co-founder could be for you, even if you don't know them as well. I think you can get someone that really complements your own mindset, but you've got to understand what that is and what your skill set is. To give an example, actually, the person we're working with has come from a really strong product background. And we were looking at a potential kind of tech co-founder, and the more we've gone down the process and the more we've spoken with CTOs and advisors, we actually kind of feel that the person's strong enough with a product lead to actually potentially hire someone more junior down the line as a kind of developer, and then actually look at a slightly more sort of sector specialist co-founder instead, to actually complement the skill set a little bit more. But that's taken a couple of months of meetings to try and work out exactly what that looks like. And you've always got to think about what your skill set is, and also what roles are going to be really hard for you to fill as you scale that business. And often we see it in kind of tech roles. It's very tricky, I think, to hire very good, strong kind of tech people when you're an early stage business. The other aspect we see a really tough hire is on growth as well, and growth marketing. I think if someone hasn't got a background in that, or sort of is an analytical, that can be a really, really tricky one to get right. So you've got the opportunity when attracting a co-founder to actually have someone super strength in one of these areas that complements you, and it will make your life, I think, a lot easier as you start to scale as well. So it's it's about really kind of understanding what that skill set of yours is, and being able to complement it.
Yeah, there's a great point in there as well about kind of the trap of sort of hiring and finding co-founders from your own network, because it does end up being quite homogenous in terms of the way people think, their backgrounds, and so on. Is that something? So, Anne, have you kind of did you want to kind of expand on that? And I don't know if you had any advice, particularly around bringing in different skills.
Yeah, I would say, like, in terms of the skills, maybe I might change skills to, like, shall I say, like, parts of your relationship with your co-founder, because there's a lot of soft skills that I think are particularly tricky to assess for at the beginning, but are really critical for the longevity and, like, the quality of your, relationship and your co-founder dynamics. And, like, we've seen this so many times with the founders in our program, but if you have if the relationship between you and your co-founder is off, investors and customers pick up on that so quickly, even if they can't quite articulate that there's exactly what's off with the relationship. It's very apparent, and investors are literally professionals at assessing this. And so you can't, when you're finding a co-founder, like, take it super, super slowly, while you want to, like, have, the pedal to the metal in all aspects of your startup and be going fast, fast, fast. Like, this is not the area that you want to rush it. And, prolonging those conversations for even an extra month or two can be the difference between your startup, being successful or failing in the future, whether that's 6 months from now or 5 years down the line when something happens. But I think one of the most important things is, like, being with someone who you can fully trust. And, like, my co-founder and I talk about something called, like, assume best intent, because I'm sure you guys have found this too. Like, you're kind of constantly stepping on each other's toes. And it's really easy when you're in a conversation with, like, a client to, you have to go out on a limb and say something, and you don't know whether your co-founder is going to agree. But having that basis of trust with the other person, when you're like, okay, I know that person is, like, also so focused on, like, the good of the company, that's, it's not a jab towards me, it's that they're pushing for the company. And, like, having that is just such a massive sense of relief. And it also lets you focus more on the company, rather than, like, having that voice in your head being like, is this person trying to stab me in the back, blah, 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 blah. You just never have to worry about that, which means you can put all of that focus into your company. I would also say communication style. Like, me and my co-founder, we have different communication styles, but we know what works for each other. And so this is really stupid, and this is a lot of people slag this off, but we did the Myers-Briggs test kind of by accident at the beginning when we started the company. And it was so useful to see how, if someone says X, Y, and Z, the other person hears A, B, and C. And so kind of understanding the language to communicate with each other is, like, one of the best uses of your time that will pay off in the future. There's a lot more I could say there.
Absolutely. And I think the thing that really resonated with me there was the point about trust, because, really important to get your shareholders agreement sorted and kind of, have a sense of where you're going. But, as much as you can have that protection, like if you can't trust them, you're not going to have a healthy relationship. And also you can't protect yourself from everything, right? Like whatever agreements you have in place, etc. If they are a co-founder, like that's it. So yeah, if you that trust absolutely paramount there. And, I can think of those conversations I've had, I'm sure we've all had, when you do butt heads, and then it's a kind of, like you say, it's that feeling out the communication style and just being able to talk about it. For me, it's like, don't let it simmer. Just, don't let like that feeling of frustration simmer, like just talk about it, Yeah. And what about in terms of like the people on your program? I mean, are you matching co-founders at the moment? Is there anything that you do to kind of help there?
We don't. Most people will come to us when they have their co-founder. We have a number of startups who are actively looking for a co-founder as well. And then we've also seen a lot of co-founder relationships fall apart as well. So we've seen a lot, but that's not something that we get actively involved in for now. I'd love for that to change though.
Yeah.
But
And do you want to just, yeah, I was just going to say, it'd be great for you to expand on that a bit. I mean, before we go into the kind of where can people look, like, were there any kind of commonalities or key causes that you noticed in the ones that didn't work?
I think when people find someone who looks great on paper, it's really easy to get excited and think, oh my gosh, like this person's going to bring in all these skills. It's going to look so great to investors. They have, this big name company on their CV that's going to help, blah, blah, blah. But then if the person's an asshole and sorry, I don't know if I can swear, oops, and you hate working with them, then that's going to like be the death of you guys. Like it's not something that you can like lie to yourself and be like, no, this is going to work. This is going to work. If you have that gut feeling, like get out. And I mean, we've seen a company where they brought on a co-founder who looked great on paper, but this guy was just like a quite horrible person to be around. And they ended up falling apart. And so it's important to remember like that your co-founder is also a representation of your company and you. And so they absolutely don't need to be like you. In fact, they shouldn't be like you, but like they are representing you. And so don't be afraid to like, listen to a voice in your head, even if they look great.
Yeah. Do you want to add to that, Greg? Because I can see you nodding, and obviously this is your career, right? You've been sort of placing people in companies for 20 years or whatever.
I think that's a really good point. I think it's I see it a lot with people getting kind of starry-eyed, I think, over certain brands, and as sort of people come in, they see how much it could potentially impact their ability to raise investment, etc. And I think you've almost got to try and put both of you in tough, tricky situations as you're making that decision to become co-founders, because I think it's really tough to actually kind of see how that dynamic works unless there's a little bit of stress or this back and forth. And I always think it's worth you trying to kind of get working on something, like start things off by actually like just getting on with it before you actually kind of get to that kind of agreement perspective to really work out how you can actually gel. And I think it's worth doing that. And I think you have to invest that early on, because if you do make the wrong decision, it can have such a detrimental impact to your startup and ultimately your life. I've seen some really some really tricky kind of startup founder divorces that kind of go on as you're going through it. So you got to make sure that you put the time up front before making that leap, and then make sure you've got a strong enough shareholder agreement in place. I'd also say is making sure you've both got or even if there's three of you, like a shared vision on where you see the business going as well, like early on. Like I think that has to be really really key, because there's so many different ways that businesses can grow and directions it can go in, but I think you need to work out exactly what you want it to look like, what you want your life to look like as you're growing that business as well. Make sure you're aligned on that on that balance, because I think sometimes I see different co-founders who work in very different ways and want different work-life balances and want to create the business in different ways. And I think you've got to be really aligned, I think, on the start. I think I was lucky when we were starting Agora. We've always had a really kind of shared vision on where we see the business going and the culture we want to create. And I think you really need that to be right. And then the next thing is just making sure you've got clear roles within the business. And this is something probably we took longer to work out. And it does take time, because your roles will change as the business kind of develops as well. You're kind of all rounders and wearing so many hats early on, but as the business starts to scale, you need to see your place within that. And often, I think some of the best founders that I've seen have even been able to really change their roles and being able to, who's the CEO from years kind of 0 to 2 could be a very different character when business starts to scale as well. So you need to just keep an eye on how that looks like, and and make sure you've got a really good shareholders agreement in place. And even going through that process, I think make sure it's stringent, like spend the money up front to do it. And as you're going through those testing questions, you'll find there'll be niggles and there'll be disagreements, and it's how you kind of work through those. And and ultimately what Em said there is just listen to that gut. If you've got that little voice, or there's anything saying, is this right? Is this the right person? I think you've got to be 100% convinced that it's the right person.
Yeah, just a quick side note on that. If you haven't heard of shareholder agreement, so it's a legal document that defines how your company is operated, and it impacts all kinds of things like what sort of share classes you have, how disputes are resolved, how shares can be sold, and so on. But as Greg mentioned there, it's really useful because normally if you're working with some kind of template, or you're like directly with a lawyer, it does force you to ask those questions and kind of set your standards for the company, and running through those questions is a really healthy exercise together. And just like you say there, Greg, just make sure you're aligned. And I think that's the other thing is, it is a heady moment when you're starting up, and it's so exciting. And often those conversations, will go on to sort of, where this could go, what it could be in the future. Whereas like you said there, you really do need to put that time into kind of saying, what lifestyle are you going to live now, right? You might be in different phases of your life. One of you could have kids or a mortgage or something else, or want to work, 30 hours a week or whatever it is, but just making sure that you are aligned on the day to day and even the financial aspects. Can you afford to work for free for a certain amount of time? Like what is actually your salary expectations? And because if they aren't aligned, like there does have to be a bit of a balance in terms of sort of effort in and results reward out. So just kind of feeling that out as well. I don't know if there's anything you want to add on that, Anne.
Yeah, I would add to, like, along with what you were saying, there's certain conversations that you couldn't have if you're hiring someone, but realistically, if someone's going to be your co-founder, you will need to discuss. Again, this is not legal advice, but like my co-founder and I had discussions around what our life would look like over the next 5-10 years in terms of, family and all that stuff. Again, not something you could ask an employee, but like it would be kind of irresponsible to not have that discussion with co-founder. And again, like that's just a plan, and life never goes according to plan, but it's really useful to have that understanding. And also, even if you feel like everything with your co-founder is amazing, you have to do a founders agreement. You absolutely have to, as soon as you decide to bring them on as your co-founder. And that will bite you. I was going to say bite you in the ass, but again, I'm not sure if we can swear, so sorry, that's twice now. But investors will notice that if you don't have it. And I mean, they'll force you to sign one anyway. So like do it up front, because it makes you look a lot better. You can do it on Save Legals. I think it's like part of their chips program or something, but yeah, absolutely. Get that done.
Yeah. And do you mean a shareholders agreement, or is that a slightly different document?
So the shareholders agreement for founders agreement, I think it's more specific for founders, but I imagine that there's founders agreement that are also called shareholders agreement. The one that we did was specifically for founders. But I would just make sure either one that you're using, make sure it asks questions around like, if someone leaves, if someone's a bad leaver, if someone, chooses to leave, vesting schedules, like all that stuff, make sure it's covered in it.
Absolutely. And I think that, as you say, if investors are looking at a company, they want to see that stuff in place.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, if you grow a business organically like that, you definitely need that stuff in place too. But when you're going for capital, like that really does define, in a way how the business will be run, right? Because you're bringing in other shareholders, you're setting yourself up on a journey to scale in a slightly different way. So it kind of puts even more pressure on kind of those structures and what you've agreed.
Oh, sorry. Two things.
And
Two things
then
I forgot.
when,
Can I add something quick? I just forgot something. I
yeah,
was gonna say, make sure too you're on
of
the same
course.
page around money. Like that's something that we ended up being on the same page about. But if we weren't, we didn't know to check it before. Like, and money in terms of how you want to spend your company's money. Like, thankfully, we're both very, very cheap and do everything to conserve our company's money. But like, if one of us had different expectations around that, it would cause a lot of problems. And then also, if you both disagree who has the final decision, that's not a comfortable conversation to have, but it's important to set that up. And that might be like in certain categories, this person has the final say, in this category, this person, or if we don't agree, we need to come up with something else, blah, 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 leave it up to you, but like have that discussion.
Absolutely. I
Yeah,
think that goes back to what Greg was saying, right? Like you've got roles, and maybe because you are like head of marketing role, then therefore you make the final decision in that space, and so on. Is that right?
I, I actually think it's quite interesting on that point around how do you kind of spend money and have the difference in approach, because I think we've got actually like quite different, like sometimes quite different views on how it's usually on how optimistic we are about the kind of business outlook and what to invest in. And I'm actually usually the most kind of pessimistic one of the three. I'd probably say Caroline the most kind of optimistic, and then we kind of have Felix who can kind of work in the middle sometimes. And I think it's actually how you kind of it's how you have those conversations and work through them. And I think sometimes actually having people from different views can also work, as long as your communication styles strong enough to be able to work through it and actually come to a happy medium often.
Yeah. Absolutely. I remember being in a position with my old co-founder where it's like, he'd be mega optimistic around the targets and stuff, and I'd be much more like operational, but it ends up being a really healthy balance. And I think if you can find that balance, it's great, because you do need somebody that's going to be like, we're going to go absolute guns blazing. And then you also need the person that's going to be like, how do we actually get that done? And if you can get, like, you have that kind of like range of personalities, like, I think that's really, really good. Yeah. Okay, so we've talked a decent amount about questions there and kind of feeling out co-founders. Have you got any tips around kind of where people can go to kind of find, we talked about sort of fishing from your own personal network, but, if that isn't, that's probably the first thought of call. Like, where would you suggest after that, I guess?
I'd say like on the Fishing Personal Network, because I think sometimes people kind of say that, but they actually don't do it proactively enough. Like I think it's worth you like just having a lot of breakfast, lunches, like meeting up with old colleagues, just running the idea, because you need to run the idea past as many people as you can. I think you've really got to do that work and just keep asking the question. And if you're good enough at it, and you can really open up some conversations, they can have people in their networks. And I think you've really got to kind of almost target yourself at saying, right, I'm having 3 meetings a week and it's going to be with old people, and just see how you'd be surprised how much people help as well. So I think really work that effectively. There's then I think the networking startup scene in kind of London is as busy as it ever has been. There's an event most night. You can go on Eventbrite and you can kind of see all these different meetups that are happening. It can be exhausting. Some will be positive, some won't be, but then you can have that one conversation that can really kind of spark something off really great. But you've got to kind of put it in to do it. But there's a whole heap of really good ones that are out there now, and I think it's about pushing yourself out there as much as possible. You can also advertise as well. So if you look at taking out potentially like a LinkedIn ad or an Otter ad, it's expensive, but it's worth it, I think, when you're thinking about when you're putting that investment early on into your business. So it's often worth potentially looking at that as a route as well. And then I think, and then if you want to go down the scheme, there are a lot of sort of schemes and founders matchings that are out there as well, if you want that as a route as well. So you've got a lot of avenues, I think, to go and try to unearth them, and then maybe even cold outreach. Look at what that perfect potential profile could look like and run it past them. And I think when you're doing the outreach early on with people, you've got to realise that you'll have all the enthusiasm in the world for your idea, I think, early on, and I think often it takes time for it to build. So you've also got to be really structured, I think, in the communication that you have with people to build their excitement as it goes. And I think you need a good element of pace and seeing that project's working, and you've got to kind of make sure that you're keeping on top of those different leads as you're working through things as well.
Yeah. There's, obviously a lot of that stuff's fun, but you're kind of describing it's effectively a sales process, right? You've got to keep in touch with people, got to put that face time in. You're building trust, you're building excitement, and having a little bit of structure there. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what about you? Any suggestions to add on there in terms of actually finding potential candidates?
That was a very thorough answer, so I don't have that much to add. I'd just say, like, it truly is luck and serendipity, but the good thing is that you can manufacture luck and serendipity by getting out there. Like, if you stay in your room and you talk to 5 people, there's nothing that's going to like help you find your co-founder. You have to get out there, and it really only takes that one conversation. And so whether if you have to go through 100 bad conversations in order to get to that one, well, the ROI is definitely going to be there. So, like, don't be discouraged if you go to 2 months worth of events and you go to three events per week, and all of a sudden you've been to loads and you're exhausted and annoyed. Still keep up that enthusiasm, because the person could be at the next one. And as Greg said, like, people are so keen to help. And if you ask for it, like, people are there to help you.
Absolutely, and that's what I love about this space. So we are out of time there, but hopefully there's some really sort of practical and useful stuff for people that are on that journey. In terms of questions you can ask, where you can look, and just look at the importance of getting the right person and some of the sort of safety checks you can do there, without losing that kind of enthusiasm and excitement on your search. Because that's the thing, when you find that one person, I think we've all kind of were reminiscing in those as we were giving answers there, but when you find that right person, it does feel awesome. So yeah, keep putting the effort in. It'd be lovely if maybe there's a kind of final question. I didn't prep you for this, but maybe you could tell us the 1 or 2 questions you think that it's really important to ask when you're kind of in those initial chats with a potential co-founder. So Greg, do you want to go first for that one?
Oh, the tricky one. Yeah, I'd always ask why they want to start a business. I really get to understand their ambitions and why they want to do it, why they're really excited about it. Like, you need to get to the heart of that, and then really understand what their weaknesses are, and kind of I actually really like the personality profiling that Em mentioned, because I think it's a really good thing to go through, because you need to work out how to communicate with each other, really understand them, and I think they're some of the kind of key things there.
And over to you.
Yeah, I would say, in addition to doing the like DD or due diligence on like their work ethic, their like pace of execution, all that fun stuff, to test for like self-awareness, I'm not going to take credit for this question. I saw someone post it. I can't remember who. So sorry if I'm copying someone. But it was, how do you think others view you, and what do you think other people get wrong about you?
Nice. That's a great question. Yeah.
And the last point on that as well, I'd say it is reference as well, like reference the person. It's really easy to get out there, I think, and work out who's worked with different people, but it's really I think it's really important to speak to people that have worked with them, managed them, been managed by them. I think it's that's super important as well.
Awesome. So just to wrap it up, it'd be lovely to hear kind of if people want to get in touch with you, or if you want to give kind of a plug for yourself and what you're doing. Greg, if you want to go first.
Yeah, I spend most of my life on LinkedIn. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Greg Wellman, and feel free to connect and ask away. And always a good place to find me.
And for me, our website is just hotbed.co, and you can find me on LinkedIn, Margaret Anne Coyle. It's super, super long name, so I apologize for that. And on Twitter, our company is just hotbed_co.
Lovely. Well, thanks again for joining us today. Agora are a partner of the pitch this year. They support us, I think, for the last 3 years, and they are, as with the other partners, instrumental in making sure that we can provide all this support to you, the community, for free. And they bring a lot of value to the table through events like this and supporting the people in our network. So please do reach out for Greg if you are looking to hire, or obviously he has that pro bono outreach to help people find co-founders. So I'm sure he'd love to hear from you on LinkedIn about that too. So thanks for listening and